Hi, this is David. Today we're going to continue our discussion on building a Java application, and I'm going to talk about services in Java. Now, this is the same application I was working on before. It's a simple web service built with Spring Boot, and I'm going to add one more method to this controller. The method is called addNumbers, and it accepts two parameters, first number, second number, and all it does is it adds those two numbers together, and then it'll return that sum with an HTTP status code of 200 and using this response entity. And because of these decorations here, this tells me what the mapping is, and it'll be something like add the route. I'll hit an HTTP GET request at addNumbers /something /something, and that first number will be mapped to this parameter, second number will be back to that parameter right there. And let's just make sure this works here. We'll select run right here. And once it's running, then I can go into Postman and select GCast /addNumbers / and then the next two parameters will be two arbitrary numbers like 10 and 17. And I'll send a GET request there, and I'll get back the sum of 10 and 17, which is 27. So it works, and it works just fine. This is a pretty simple example, but if it were something more complex, I probably wouldn't want to leave that logic here in the controller. I would probably want to move it out to a service. So if it's doing something more than just adding two numbers together, just imagine it's doing something like querying a database, running some complex workflow, maybe calling other web services, whatever. But this is a simple example just to prove how to do this. Now, to create a service, let me just go ahead and stop this right now. I like to group my services into a single package, and packages show up like folders in Java. So I'm going to call this one services. So I like all my services to be underneath services. And then I'm going to create a new Java class, and I don't really have to do this, but it's a good practice to create an interface first and base your class on that interface. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create an interface, and I'm going to name that interface Math Service right here. And in this, I want to define what the signature of my math service would be. So I could have something like, for example, a method that returns an integer, and it's called addNumbers, and it accepts an integer. Give this first parameter the name first number, and another integer, and call that one second number. And I'm not going to put any code in here. This is just defining what the interface will look like, what methods are available, what properties are available. I could actually add something like subtract numbers as well, which would subtract one from another one. I won't do that right now. I'll just leave it like this and save it. And then I will add a new Java class, and this time it'll actually be a class, and I'll call it Math Service IMPL for implementation. And this one I want to say this class implements Math Service. And what that means is that this class will have all of the methods and properties defined in that interface. And in IntelliJ, I actually can right click and say context act and say implement methods. Click OK. It'll actually create this for me. So here I've got a method called addNumbers. It takes those two parameters right here. I've specified the override attribute, which means that it's going to override whatever in the interface, and I want to put the same code that I had in my controller. If I go back to my controller, I can just copy this bit of code here right here, and I'm not going to return a response entity. I just want to return the sum. Like that. So add two numbers together and return their sum. Very simple. Now, when I call this, I'm going to call it from my controller, and I'll delete that code there, and instead of actually putting the logic in here, I'm just going to call the service and let the service do that for me. So the first thing I need to do is to instantiate the service, and I called my service math service. I could declare it as a math service interface here, and I'll give it the name math service. But when I new it up, I'm going to new up the implementation of that. And once I have that, then I can say integer sum equals math service dot add numbers, and pass in first number and second number right here. And then I can return a new response entity type integer, just like I did before, with an HTTP status of OK. And the difference here is that rather than doing the math inside of here, I'm actually shelling that out to a service. Let's run this. And then go back into Postman and call this again. I'll give it two different numbers here. I'll say 11/5 and send that, and that still works the same. But the difference is that I've moved this into a service. Now, you may have noticed that I'm actually newing up. I'm declaring this as an interface, and I'm instantiating the implementation of the interface, and that's okay. This gives me the flexibility to change the actual implementation, but it's hard. In order to change it this way, I actually have to change the code. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use some attributes to inject the implementation you want to use and code to an interface. But until then, I've shown you how to create services and base those services on an interface. This is David. Thank you for watching.